On my second visit to the Philippines, I met this really lovely gal. She's 23, I'm 35, and there was this instant connection between us. I'm an American, by the way. She was this perfect traditional girl, cooking, cleaning, doing everything that you wouldn't normally expect from a Western woman, and she absolutely adored me. Over 3 years, I took numerous trips to the Philippines. I genuinely thought I'd found my future wife. She came from a solid family, not well off, living in a rural area on a dirt road, 10 kilometers out in the countryside. They're not religious, just good, down-to-earth people. I'd always dreamt of marrying a traditional woman. I feel that feminism and Western culture make it really hard to find a loyal, decent wife here in the States. That's why I'm drawn to Filipino women. I tied the knot with my wife 3 years after meeting her. There weren't any red flags. She had just finished her nursing degree in the Philippines, and I'd covered most of her tuition costs during her 3 years at nursing school. Once she comes to the States, she'll be making good money. I work at the DMV, so I'm not exactly raking it in, even though she'll earn more than me when she gets to the States. While she was in the Philippines, I paid for her apartment, helped out her family financially, and footed the bill for our wedding. When I got back to the US, I applied for a spousal visa for my wife while she was still in the Philippines. After her interview at the US Embassy in her home country, they issued her an immigrant visa that was good for a year. Once she landed in the US, we spent 4 years bouncing back and forth with USCIS to secure her 10-year green card. That whole process was super complicated, time-consuming, and definitely not cheap. During those 4 years, she took her nursing exam, passed it, and we had a little girl. Since she was earning way more than me, I decided to be the stay-at-home dad for our daughter. I did some part-time work and a few side gigs, but she was the one bringing home the bacon. In those 4 years, she was an amazing wife. I didn't see any warning signs. We didn't have any major marital problems during her visa process, but I did start to notice that she was getting pretty into the American lifestyle. It didn't become super obvious until she got her 10-year green card. She knew that once she got that card, the only way I could send her back to her home country was if she committed a serious crime. Once she had her green card, it felt like she just checked out of our marriage. She was totally loving her new life, the independence, and the freedom. It didn't feel like we were growing apart. It felt like we were pushed apart. She became distant, occasionally a bit harsh, and always seemed to find a reason to be out of the house. The isolation from the pandemic didn't help. I know she looks at life in the US and thinks, "This is so dull. We don't go anywhere or see anyone. It's a terrible place to live." She doesn't realize that the pandemic lockdown would be way worse in her home country. About 6 months ago, I noticed a shift. She started telling little white lies and going out with co-workers after hours. Suddenly her phone, her paycheck, her bank account, everything was off limits to me. I tried talking to her. I asked her if she wanted something different or if we needed to shake things up. I even went to marriage counseling with her, although she wasn't too thrilled about it. But it was clear she wasn't committed to anything other than finding her own happiness. I asked the counselor to spend more time with me, but for some reason, she blew me off. That's a separate issue I'll deal with later. She stopped wearing her wedding ring half a year ago. I gave her a list of things I expected from her, like wearing her ring, not driving drunk, and letting me know where she was going, but she totally ignored it. That's when I realized, if I caught her lying again, it would be the final straw. I told her I knew she was keeping secrets and she needed to come clean. I called her out on some of the lies, but she just denied everything and basically shut down. The lies kept getting bigger and more frequent, but she still managed to deny them. Until last month, when she got tangled up in her own web of lies. I pushed her for the truth, and after an hour, she finally admitted it. She had a secret Tinder account, and she'd been seeing a bunch of guys she met on there. I've got a pretty good idea of what she was up to. She'd call out sick from work, but still drive to the office, park, and then hop in an Uber to go see her side guys. She did this multiple times. She'd text me saying she was at a work party, but she'd really be at some Tinder guy's place all night. She'd text me saying she was too drunk to drive and was gonna crash there. On her days off, she'd say she was going shopping, but was actually sneaking off to some guy's apartment. This happened a bunch of times. She'd even meet up with these guys in her work parking lot. The problem is, I didn't figure all this out until it was too late. When I cornered her for the truth last month, she only spilled about 10% of it. Her response was, "I've told you enough." And she's still lying about these things. I mean, she's not just a cheater, she's a full-blown liar. I know for a fact she's met up with her Tinder flings at least 23 times with at least 11 different guys, but she only admits to seeing 4 of them. It took about 2 weeks for all this to come out, and with each passing day, my pain, stress, sadness, and anger just kept growing. It's been 6 weeks since she fessed up, and I'm still only sleeping about 3 hours a night. I've got a pretty good handle on what she was up to. Our little girl is absolutely lovely and so full of joy. She's at that age where she turns everything into a fun game or a wild adventure. She really should have both parents there to keep up with her, guide her growth, and share in the joy of her childhood. But her mom has been missing in action for at least 6 days a week, putting her own desires above everything else. Our girl is really starting to feel the effects. Every day she asks, "Where's mommy? I want to play with her. Is mommy gonna tuck me in tonight?" And she's starting to act out, desperate for attention. It's totally unacceptable that my wife is squandering these precious years of our daughter's life. She's done irreversible harm to our family. I'm the one at home all day, every day, looking after our daughter while my wife works and has her secret life. Any free time my wife should have spent with our daughter, she instead spent out and about, fooling around with random guys and seeking her own pleasure while I was at home meeting our toddler's every need. The pandemic had us cooped up in the house for 6 months, with our only outings being neighborhood strolls, and my solo grocery store runs every 10 days to avoid COVID exposure. My daughter is my #1 concern. All this time, while I've had a toddler hanging on me, I couldn't keep tabs on my wife's nighttime activities, and I couldn't even consider having an affair myself, even if I wanted to. My wife took advantage of the fact that I was tied down at home, so she could have her alone time and mess around. She totally disregarded our daughter's needs, instead focusing on her own desires every chance she got. And she did all of this in the middle of a pandemic. She's a nurse, so she knows the risks. She put our family in danger, including our little girl, sleeping around with different men while health experts are advising us to limit contact with people outside our household. She won't talk about what was going through her head when she was leaving our daughter alone and making choices that put us at a high risk for COVID-19. She clearly doesn't have a motherly bone in her body, showing no regard for our daughter's health and welfare. 3 days after my wife confessed to the basics of her actions, I got in touch with a divorce lawyer. She'll be served the papers within a week, September 2020. My wife has no idea what's coming. In her eyes, I've been a picture-perfect husband for the past 5 weeks. She hasn't shown any guilt, regret, or remorse for wrecking me, our marriage, and our daughter's life. In fact, she probably thinks I'm begging for forgiveness, since I've been trying to cater to her every need and pamper her. She's mentioned a few times, "I'm hurting, I'm trying to hold it together." But she's still the same, hiding, lying, and striving for independence. You live and learn, I guess. I feel taken advantage of. She's got her green card. She'll benefit from our marriage. She still has her roster of Tinder flings. Soon, she'll have the absolute freedom she's always wanted. But there's no way in hell I'm letting my daughter be raised by her. Heads up, I've been jotting down everything in a journal since the end of March. It's just a text file, but it's now up to 350 KB, and I've recorded everything. I also keep extra copies just in case. Her green card's good for 10 years, and trust me, I know the ins and outs of this thing. I planned, applied, and finished all the immigration stuff so we'd be set for a lifetime here in the US. She's not gonna lose her green card, which is a bummer, unless she commits a serious crime. A US immigrant visa means I promised the US government to pay back the govdie for any public benefits she gets for basically a decade. I signed that with my eyes wide open. I never thought otherwise. And I'm cool with that. The cash I would have spent on health insurance, beauty products, clothes, and whatnot, if we'd stayed married, would probably cost more. My lawyer and I have already put together the divorce papers, pointing out my wife's constant absence and her disinterest in our daughter's welfare. We even have written statements from friends and neighbors who've seen me being the round-the-clock parent. So, fingers crossed, that should give me a leg up in the custody battle. The draft papers already request the court to rule that I keep our daughter's passports, that my wife can't take her out of the country, and that she needs my approval to get new passports for our daughter. Got that covered. My daughter's my #1 concern, and if it comes down to paying hefty spousal support or getting custody of my child, I'll happily make that deal, although my wife doesn't know that. I've glanced over the 180 stuff, not really getting what it's all about. Unless it's to help patch things up. I'll look over it again, but this time with the goal of distancing myself. I reckon I'm pretty far into the points already, and for the past 5 weeks, I've been playing the perfect husband. But fixing things ain't happening. There's no way I'm gonna be the guy whose wife is messing around with a ton of Tinder dudes every month. She's dead set against promising that she'll stop doing it. So there's no point in asking for a give me a timeline or write no contact letters. Divorce is happening and that's that. She might turn ugly when she finds out about the divorce, I'm not sure. But my lawyer and I are getting ready. Her go-to move when I try to talk things out is to shut down, but if she switches it up with crying and begging for another chance, I won't bite. She made her bed. There's no going back now. 2 things I gotta do after reading posts here. Set up a doc appointment for a full checkup, including testing for STDs. We were intimate not often, but during the months she was with other guys, I had no idea, and I need something to help me sleep. I'll grab a voice-activated recorder on my next grocery run. Update. My attorney and I make a good team, and I trust his experience and guidance. But I'm stuck between following my gut and taking his advice. I was all set to spill the beans to my wife's family when she got the divorce papers. Her folks live back in her home country. I filled my lawyer in on my plan and he was like, "Nah, don't do that. We don't want to look like we're out to get her and mess up any chances of working things out." I get that. But if anyone can knock some sense into my wife, it's her folks. We spent 3 years living in her home country after tying the knot, only about a 10-mile drive from her mom, dad, brother and sisters. I really dig her family. In fact, they were one of the reasons I chose to marry her. Plus, I think they respect me too. I've been told so many times how much they appreciate me and how well I fit into their world. They're gonna be out for blood. I mean, not literally, I hope, when they hear what she's been up to. I've been down this road before when my wife stepped out of line, and her family set her straight real fast, leaving her feeling sorry and with a stern warning not to bring shame on the family. That's how it is over there. Family comes first, and I was happy to be a part of that. The divorce papers are going to be delivered next week. My signature's already on them. Just hanging tight for one more statement from a buddy who can vouch for my bond with my daughter. So, I gotta make up my mind in the next few days. Should I break the news to her family? Or should I wait till the divorce is all done and dusted, probably 4-5 months from now, like my lawyer suggests, so it doesn't throw a wrench in any negotiations? If I hold off on telling them right now, she likely won't spill the beans right away either, though she can't keep it under wraps for too long. When she got busted, she told a few of her buddies, "I cheated on my husband," and she'll probably stick to that story. But it's a whole lot worse than that. She was on Tinder hooking up with at least a dozen random dudes, sneaking off to their places when she was supposed to be working, leaving me to take care of our daughter around the clock when she could have been there for her. And she did all this smack in the middle of a pandemic. Her family deserves to know the whole truth. They're gonna be beyond pissed. But for me, the best case scenario would be if she decided to go back to her home country, leaving me and my daughter in peace, and allowing me to raise my daughter with real family values. I don't know if she'd be up for that, but I need to have some bargaining chips. My lawyer's got a point. If I blow the whistle on her to her parents right now, she won't have a reason to go back to her home country just to face the music. Update. I can see folks reacting the same way I did when all this stuff came out. I highly doubt my wife fessed up to more than like 10% of the real story. But when she first owned up to meeting one dude from Tinder, I was still in the dark about the rest. I straight up asked if they used protection. Obviously, my mind jumped to STDs first, but there's a ton of other risky behavior involved too. Hello, COVID. She was like, "Yes, but seriously, how could I verify that?" And it would be super naive to think she had any kind of barrier method going on during BJ, so even if a protection made a brief appearance, I'm not fooling myself. And then I found out about all the other guys. She also claimed she wore a face mask when she first met these guys. She seems to believe this somehow demonstrates how mindful she was about keeping us healthy, including our little girl. Unbelievable. And I know for a fact she's not telling the truth. There's really no point in grilling her on these things. She'd just keep lying, and the reality is already clear as day. She was out doing all this for at least 3 months. Every single free moment outside of work, both scheduled and unscheduled time off, was spent chasing after men. Meanwhile, I was at home with our daughter, all day, every day. She should have been here with our little girl. She should have stepped up and been a mom, not absent from our kid's life. Heck, she should have been a wife. Like I said before, she's a nurse, she works in healthcare, she knows better. She should have done everything she could to shield us from the risk of COVID. Nope, there's zero chance I'm thinking about getting back together. The divorce paperwork is all ready, just waiting on one more statement from a witness. Someone who can speak to how much I'm there for my daughter. My lawyer tells me we should be all set to serve her the papers next week. As for the whole 180 inches thing, I've got all my ducks in a row for this divorce. She doesn't have a clue about what's about to hit her. We haven't touched the big bad issue for over a month because she flat out refuses to have that conversation. Naturally, I wanted to know all the gritty details. How, when, why, who, where. I guess that's the usual response when you find out your wife's been messing around. But she's done nothing but lie, manipulate, shift the blame, and completely shut down. I tried talking to her for a couple days, but she basically said, "Stop asking questions or I'm out of here." I never had reconciliation on the table. I just wanted to understand why she blew up our marriage and set our daughter up for a world of hurt. But for the past month and a half, I haven't brought it up. There's no point. It's over, and she's got to deal with what comes next. We don't chat about that stuff, but we do talk about everyday life. What I'm making for dinner, yeah, I'm the one keeping the home fires burning while she's out working or whatever. What our daughter got up to today, when she's due for her next bath and so on. I've checked out. I'm already looking forward. The divorce papers will, hopefully, instruct her to pack her bags in 6 weeks' time, which feels like a lifetime to me, but the court wants us to be reasonable. Unfortunately, because we share a kid, my soon-to-be ex is going to be a part of my life for a while yet. I'd prefer if she just vanished. So, my previous post, the one where I was asking when should I spill the beans to her family, was just me looking for some input and advice based on other people's experiences. Her family, who all live back in her home country, are gonna flip their lids when they hear about this. Should I lay it all out for them next week when she gets served? Or should I hold off like my attorney's suggesting? Of course, that question doesn't impact the divorce if it gets to court. But I think the best outcome I can get in the divorce is through negotiation. My dream outcome is that my wife simply return to her country and leave me and my daughter in peace. My lawyer says if I burn her bridges in her home country, she might have no reason to go back if her parents will put her in the firing squad. The court will never order her to leave the U.S. They will give her spousal support, child custody rights, hopefully at 50%, order me to pay for her apartment, etc. The best outcome for me is to negotiate the divorce, and my attorney says to keep things even. Don't come across now as mean. On the other hand, I want her family to know the truth, which won't come from her. A couple of folks have been asking me, are you certain she wasn't getting paid for all of this? Honestly, that thought hadn't even crossed my mind until now. I have no clue because she keeps her bank account under tight wraps. I haven't seen her with extra money, but I know she's pretty good at hiding things, probably at her job. In any case, it wouldn't really change much, apart from maybe increasing the STD risk, if you ask me. I brought it up with my lawyer, and he didn't think it would make much of a difference either. I live in a state where the reason for divorce doesn't matter, and accepting money from a guy isn't a crime in itself. If I could prove she was selling herself, though, it would be a big plus for me in getting full custody of our daughter. But as of now, I don't have any evidence pointing to that. And yeah, I'd like to understand why she did it too. We talked about loads of stuff before we got married. Her ambitions, our life together, her dreams, and my support for her. I also made it crystal clear that if she ever cheated, I would pack my bags. Or rather, she'd have to. She remembers that talk, I'm sure. Maybe this is her dramatic way of asking for a divorce. If that's the case, she sure made her point, but it would have been way easier if she'd just told me she wanted out. Or maybe she tasted the sweet life of freedom here in the US and went off the rails. Coupled with the struggle of adjusting to a new culture, being away from family, trying to fit in and figuring out her emotional state, it seems like she just couldn't handle the pressure. I've spent a good chunk of my life overseas, so I get how culture shock feels. I was always there for her, helping her navigate the ups and downs of moving halfway across the globe. But all of that counts for nothing now, considering she's overstepped her boundaries at least 100 times, I'd say. I've tried to decipher the why behind all of this, but I'm not going to dig any further. For the first few days after the bomb dropped, I tried to get her to explain her reasons, but hit a brick wall. She goes silent. If she can't be honest with herself, how can she be straight with me? Let's be clear. Our marriage is done and dusted. The divorce papers will be handed to her next week. Yeah, I get it. I'm not the first guy to be taken for a ride like this. I've read a lot about scams from her country. I've even seen some firsthand. So I know you gotta be on your toes all the time. The thing is, we met face to face, not on the internet. I don't even have social media accounts. I thought our story was one of a kind and we had a solid foundation. I travel for the thrill of it, and I've never been the type to take advantage of women. She shared a lot about her family, and a week after meeting her, I was like, let's do this. I want to see where you're from. This involved a 20-hour journey by ferry and bus, so it wasn't a small decision. What I'm trying to say is that I didn't see any signs of a scam in her. After we tied the knot, we lived in her country for 3 years while I commuted back and forth to the US. My radar was on, but I didn't have any suspicions, and I consciously decided moving to the US was the best for our relationship. And then, everything fell apart. Finally, I got a tele-appointment with my doctor. No in-person visits due to the pandemic. I got tested for all possible STDs. It seems my wife at least made one good decision. She picked guys who were disease-free. All my tests came back negative, and there's no sign of COVID in me or our daughter yet, despite my wife's reckless behavior. And I got some sleep aids. For the past 3 nights, I've actually managed to sleep more than 3 hours. We're still in the early stages of the divorce, working on all the paperwork. There always seems to be something that adds a delay of a day or 3. We're waiting on a statement from a family friend to back up my capabilities as a dad. I'm pretty confident the divorce filing will make its way to the court next week, and then my wife will get the papers. My attorney suggested I pack a get-out-quick bag for me and my little girl. He's seen plenty of situations where the shock of getting served makes the other spouse flip out. My wife's got all next week off, so she'll be at home to receive the papers. I suppose that's one upside to her schedule change. If things go south, I'm prepared to make a quick exit with my daughter and head to a motel. I really have no idea how she's going to react, but so far, she hasn't shown any signs of facing the truth or understanding the repercussions of her actions. I'd be relieved if she just packed her bags and left. I'm asking the court to order her to be out by November 1st, but, as my lawyer points out, it's the judge's call in the end. I've laid out my case. I've set up some counseling sessions through my doctor. I'm in serious need of someone to talk to. That's another downside of this pandemic. I haven't hung out with anyone in over half a year, and I don't have any close friends around. This has been hard on my daughter too, but she's so young that she doesn't understand what normal life is supposed to be. Just found out my wife's been messing around with other guys for the past year. I've had this hunch for a few months now. She's been telling strange little fibs. She's been all over her phone like a hawk. And even during our intimate moments, things have just felt weird. But I finally busted her. Her sister didn't log out of her Facebook Messenger on my phone. What I discovered in their chats completely floored me. Thank goodness there were no pictures, but the way she was chatting about these dudes, it made my skin crawl. It's not even just one guy. From the year's worth of messages with her sis, it looks like she's been sleeping with at least 3 or 4 guys. I've got a hunch it's more though. One of them was a regular fling for 3 months while I was away, though she apparently doesn't talk to him anymore. Most recently, she hooked up with some guy at a hotel a couple weeks back. I reached out to a good buddy of mine, and he suggested I take some time to process my emotions before confronting her, but I'm not sure I can do that. When I look at her, I just feel this void. Her touch, her hugs, they only fuel this deep-seated anger and resentment. I'm basically numb. She was my first serious love, and we've been together for 3 years, but I just don't think I can keep going. I feel caged in my own home. Before I logged out of her sister's account, I took a load of screenshots and stashed them somewhere she'd never think to look. Update. So, like I said earlier, my wife has been playing around behind my back for the past year. as far as I know. I was planning to keep it on the down low till October, 'cause she's an essential witness for a court case I'm involved in. But man, it was killing me on the inside. I had a chat with my dad about it, and he made a pretty solid point. She'd already given a sworn written statement about what went down, so I figured it was about time to face her. Only a week had passed since I discovered her infidelity when I decided to have that difficult conversation. But man, that was probably the most awkward week of my life. Every glance I gave her came with a rush of anger. Every grin I flashed her was just a facade. Hitting the sack with her left me cold and void, and the worst part, being intimate with her made me feel downright gross. I forced myself through it once or twice, and then started making up reasons to avoid being intimate. I was honestly falling apart inside. The morning of the day I decided to confront her, she had the nerve to accuse me of cheating. I just stared at her and burst into a crazy laughing fit, 'cause the situation was just too ironic. It probably didn't help my case, but I stepped out of the house for a good 45 minutes to make some calls. That's when I rang up my dad and decided it was go time. After I chatted with my dad, I figured it was time to touch base with my wife's sister. See, back in October, she'd been trying to catch me about something big she wanted to spill about my wife. I just shrugged it off as some nonsense at the time, 'cause she's known for lying and stealing. But after all I'd seen, I thought maybe she was on to something real. So I reach out to her, and what does she do? She tips off my wife. So my wife gives me a ring, and I tell her I'm heading home to have that talk. I pulled into my driveway, stashed an audio recorder in my pocket, hit record on my phone's video, and tucked it into my shirt pocket. Then, I walked inside to face her. On the outside, I was all chill, but inside, I was clueless about what would go down. This lady I'd been with for years had morphed into a total stranger over the past half a year. I hit her with, "How long have you been playing around behind my back? How many dudes? Why'd you do it?" At first, she tried to play the innocent card, but when I started tossing out quotes from her chats with her sister and naming the guys she'd been with, she got real emotional, real fast. I could see tears pooling in her eyes. I asked her again, and she clammed up until I spilled on how I found out. So I told her about her and her sister's messages. She immediately broke down, but I'm not buying half of what she dished out. She claimed it was only 2 guys, but the messages I saw point to at least 3 or 4. She also insisted she hadn't cheated since March, which I called BS on, 'cause there was a message about a hotel meetup with a guy just days before my birthday. Her explanation for her actions was seriously the lamest thing I've ever heard. She said she was scared about moving far away from home, and did it because she was weak. Her second excuse was that she hadn't been with anyone else sexually before me. I told her straight up, those were the most ridiculous excuses I've ever heard. I let her know we were headed for divorce, and she just lost it, bawling her eyes out and pleading for me to stay, saying she couldn't stand to lose me. I didn't shed a tear, didn't raise my voice, didn't hurl any insults her way. I just stared at her crying, completely disgusted by the woman she'd turned into. I made it clear there was nothing she could do to change the situation. We were getting a divorce. I told her she could crash at my place for a month or 2 while she saved up some dough to move. That lasted about 10 days. Then I couldn't stand to look at her anymore, so I told her she had to leave. She ended up at a friend's place. Our split started off chill, but then she started pulling some stunts that really got under my skin. She'd ring my cell in the middle of the night when she knew I'd be asleep, just to wake me up. She came up with this crazy tale where I'm the villain, saying that I only married her to get some extra cash and that my master plan all along was to dump her once she was of no use to me. One time, she even showed up at my doorstep at 1 a.m. to collect her stuff, even though I'd been offering to drop her things off all darn day. After that episode, I went ahead and changed all the locks on my house. But what really ticked me off was when she demanded that I sign over one of my 2 cars to her in our separation agreement. I'd busted my hump to pay cash for both of those rides. She claimed she needed a car to get by, that she was entitled to one since I'd originally bought it for her, and that she deserved the car, despite the fact I'd been footing the bill for everything over the past year. She even went as far as saying she wouldn't sign any paperwork unless I gave her the car. I was so ticked off that I let things simmer for a couple of weeks before I talked to anyone about it. When I did chat with a guy about it, he pointed out that giving up this $2,500 car would be a small price to pay, considering the long-term benefits. I mean, she wasn't even interested in the pretty decent chunk of change that I've got tied up in my house, and she was even ready to give up all claims to alimony and any support after we split. The only reason I was hesitating on giving her the car, even though it would be the smarter move financially, considering what she was ready to give up for it, was because I was just too darn angry. I was letting my anger get in the way. After considering his advice, I figured he was right. We've set a date in a few weeks to sign the separation papers. All she's getting from me is a car, and I get to keep everything else. Ever since we split, I've been riding a roller coaster of emotions. I felt a lot of anger and experienced a whole lot of alone time. But the funny thing is, I haven't found myself missing her, and I haven't reminisced about any good times in the month and a half or so that we've been separated. My place is a total disaster, and I just can't find the energy to tidy it up for more than a few minutes at a time. I've been spending a lot of my downtime just lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and walls. I said goodbye to all our cats and dogs, but despite all this, I'm feeling a sense of freedom I haven't felt in ages. I feel like I can do anything I want now. Her cheating was just the last straw, really. She'd turned into a real piece of work, always hurling insults at me, regularly coming home plastered, and even getting physical with me when she was wasted. She hadn't chipped in on any of our bills for almost a year and had become super reckless, breaking things, losing stuff, and racking up tickets that I ended up having to cover. So to be honest, this breakup is for the best. I really don't know what's next or what I'm gonna do. Since I left her, I've hooked up with a few women I didn't even know before, just for the fun of it. One of them is really into me now, and she's a sweet and genuine girl, but I'm totally clueless about what to do about that. I've hit up clubs and bars for the first time, caught up with old pals, and I'm trying to get my life back in order. I can tell you right now that I'm not planning on getting hitched again for a really, really long time, if ever. I think I jumped into marriage too young, and this whole crazy year has aged me a lot. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a different world than my friends. I'm not even ready for a serious relationship right now. I've got an appointment to see a counselor or therapist at the end of this month. I mean, not only am I dealing with a divorce, but there's a mountain of other stuff in my life too. I'm just not sure if I need it. Quick update, guys. I'm literally cracking up at all the folks mad at me for giving up my pets. Relax. I found good homes for all of them. I didn't just abandon them. I made a grown-up decision because I realized I wasn't able to take care of them anymore. After cutting ties with my wife, I just didn't have the drive. And having 4 big dogs and 2 cats was just too much for one person, especially with my work schedule. Adding to the mess, my wife said she'd take one of the dogs and both cats, but then, out of the blue, she called to say she wasn't taking them anymore, so all of a sudden, all the pet care fell on me. For the past half hour, he had been observing his attractive wife as she navigated her way through the ballroom. Her intention was to position herself as far away from her husband as possible when the ball dropped at midnight. She was surrounded by well-off and self-satisfied peers, acting like an elaborate dish served for everyone's attention. Executives from his workplace would kiss and touch her, particularly his obnoxious boss who had been born wealthy. He was well aware of this routine, as his company's New Year's Eve parties had followed the same pattern for the past 2 years. During the first year, he had tolerated it, chalking it up to the effects of too much champagne. However, last year, the reality hit him hard, and he started making preparations to address the situation. Feeling a tug on his coat, he turned around to face Deirdre, Josephine's closest friend and co-conspirator. "Happy New Year, Mike," she exclaimed, reaching up to give him a somewhat pitiful kiss, an annual gesture. Their lips barely grazed before he pulled away and looked into her brown eyes. Deirdre was another socialite, coming from a wealthier family than Josephine, and just like his wife, she was part of the upper echelon. Normally, he expected to see her usual self-assured smirk, implying that she held some secret knowledge he didn't possess due to her high social status. But this time, he saw 2 new emotions on her face: pity and concern. "Mike, don't take this so seriously," she said soothingly. "She's just engaging in the custom of exchanging kisses on New Year's. She'll come back to you shortly without any harm done. She'll remind you how much she loves you." He gave her a doubtful look. Deirdre attempted to offer him reassurance. "She truly loves you, you know. It's just that she's very outgoing, lively and impulsive, whereas you tend to be more intellectual and reserved." Sometimes she needs a chance to be around people who share her nature. However, being with them only reinforces her love for you. All right, Deirdre. Is that why she spent the entire Christmas party hanging out with her coworkers under the mistletoe? We attend her Christmas party, and she spends the night dancing and being affectionate with her colleagues. Then, here at my company's New Year's Eve event, she spends the whole night dancing and kissing, though not with my firm's executives. So, by being intimate with everyone at the party except me, she's supposed to somehow gain a new appreciation for me. It's an interesting theory. Let me ask you, is this her annual tradition of giving George the imbecile a dozen kisses, or is it her way of showing love for me by doing something she knows I detest? Gotta hand it to Deirdre. She managed to look embarrassed. She couldn't meet my gaze, so she averted her eyes and tried to continue. Mike, I understand you're upset, but you have to try to see it from her perspective, don't you? Deirdre, I think I might actually understand. Perhaps for the first time in our 5-year marriage. I turned away from her, went back to our table, reached into a briefcase I'd placed there earlier, and pulled out a rather large, brightly wrapped gift. I turned away from her, took off the ring from my finger, and placed it in the center of the bow. This would make her remove the ring to open the gift. Facing Deirdre, I extended the package to her. I'm going to head out now. Please give this to your friend when she's finally able to break free from the crowd around her. Let her know I wish her a happy new year, and I hope she finds everything she deserves in the upcoming year. I began to leave, but Deirdre grabbed my arm. Don't leave, Mike. I'll go fetch her. She's had too much champagne again. You need to take her home. No, Deirdre, I don't have to. She has a room reserved here in the hotel. She's been here all day entertaining the men while I've been working. Of course. You're aware of all this because you've been here with her. She has her own car, clothes, and everything she needs. I'm pretty sure at least one of the guys she's spending time with right now will be more than willing to accommodate her. Or maybe all of them will. Don't give me that look. You fed me the same line last year when I gave her another chance. She's made her choice. And so have I. Goodbye, Deirdre. I have to admit it'll be a relief for me to never have to see you again. Walking out of the ballroom, I gave a nod to Helen, the HR director. I had spent the first half of the day with her while my boss and his buddies were busy setting things up at the hotel. To be honest, he was actually in a fancy suite, which he paid for using the company credit card. Sleeping with my wife, that is. I should correct myself, though. They were actually sleeping in the luxury suite. My wife and I have evidence in the form of photos and videos to prove it. Helen also has some of this evidence, and the chairman of the board will be informed about it very soon. After leaving the ballroom, Helen and her husband moved toward the group of men surrounding Josephine. Deirdre was also navigating her way through this group of men, some of whom persisted in attempting to kiss her as part of the tradition. A few men tried to flirt with Helen, but her husband's disapproving expression, a former American soccer forward, seemed to discourage them. Helen made her way through the crowd until she reached CEO George Burke and his companion, who were just ahead of Deirdre. A few feet away from them, she paused with her husband and observed Deirdre's puzzled expression. Then, the sound of Deirdre's name being called out sharply caught Joe's attention, causing her to break away from George's embrace. Upon noticing her friend's surprised look, Deirdre frowned. Helen, on the other hand, smiled. Deirdre held out a beautifully wrapped gift and said something to Joe, who accepted the package. She leaned in closer, appearing to ask Deirdre to repeat what she had just said. Mike left this for you. He's gone, Joe, Deirdre told her friend. He watched you flirt and make out all night, and when you started making out with all those men, he gave me that package and left. Joe grinned. Oh, you know Mike. He gets all worked up when I don't pay attention to him for a little while. I'll go home, say sorry, give him a good time in bed, and everything will be back to normal. He loves me. Even when he's mad, he leaves me a gift. Let's see what it is. Deirdre tried to interject. Joe? I don't think it's a present. But Joe was already busy untying the ribbon to open the package. As the ring fell out and hit the floor, there was a pause. Joe looked puzzled and asked, What's this? George, who had been watching, bent down, picked up the ring, and extended it toward her with a smirk. Isn't that your husband's wedding ring? Joe stopped unwrapping the gift, stared at him, perplexed, and took the ring. She glanced at Deirdre, who quietly muttered, I tried to tell you. Undeterred, Joe continued tearing off the wrapping from the present, revealing a white gift box inside. Feeling relieved, she smiled, gave the box a little shake, remarked on its weight, and began to peel off the tape on each side using her fingernail. As the tape on the third side came off, the contents of the box spilled out, scattering across the floor. She crouched down to gather the glossy sheets that had fallen. Others also squatted to help pick up the ones that had slid away. All of a sudden, everyone came to a halt. Joe's eyes widened and she shouted, "No!" Her cry grabbed the attention of those nearby, and more people gathered around them. Deirdre's eyes also widened in disbelief. She looked up and saw the horror-struck expression on George's face. He picked up a large glossy color photograph measuring 20 x 30 centimeters from the ground, placed it against his expensive suit, and involuntarily yelled, "What the heck, Joe?" He said it loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Everyone's attention turned to the scattered pictures, which depicted Joe engaging in sexual activities with people other than her husband. There were numerous images of Joe with George, as well as Joe alongside other executives from the company where Mike and Joe worked, including her colleagues and bosses. While the pictures didn't cover every position, Mike had carefully chosen ones that clearly showed Josephine engaging in shocking activities with both men and women in various combinations and quantities. Confronted with these graphic photos of her sexual escapades, Joe fainted. She fell onto her back, and George's shoe prevented her head from hitting the tile floor, potentially causing a concussion. Deirdre knelt down next to her, lifted her head, lightly slapped her face, and urgently shouted, "Joe! Joe, are you okay? Talk to me, Joe." As both women lay on the floor, others began picking up the pictures and examining them. A woman turned and struck her husband with all her might just as he was looking at the picture he held. "You're a cheater," she exclaimed. "No wonder you don't have the energy left to satisfy me." He stared at her in shock, and then she swung her purse, landing a punch on his right eye. He grimaced in pain and then crumbled to the floor when she kicked him in the groin with her pointed shoe. The woman knelt down and systematically went through the pictures scattered on the ground. She paused, glanced up, and declared, "You ladies who are married to the higher-ups at Taylor & Son might want to check out some of these photos. There are images of other husbands in here as well. If you're looking to save on divorce attorneys, give me a call, and we can explore a group rate." 9 other women knelt down, joining her in examining the photos, causing the men to back away. "There are also flash drives here," one of them announced loudly. "Who knows what's on them?" A woman directed her anger at a well-dressed older man, shouting, "You dirty cheater! Remember our prenup? You're financially ruined, you jerk!" The man tried to explain, saying, "Baby, I'm sorry. It didn't mean anything. She kept coming on to me and eventually I gave in. But it happened only once. And she wasn't as good as you anyway. You're lying, liar!" the blonde woman shouted, holding out 2 more pictures. The blonde woman stood up from the floor, her eyes filled with anger, and she confronted him, waving the pictures and unleashing a string of profanities. He stepped back, turned, and fled. Meanwhile, the other woman sobbed, clutching her chest with one hand and holding a photograph with the other. Her husband, hiding his face in his hands, was also in tears. The man took out a photo, holding it up to the attractive woman standing in front of him, and exclaimed loudly, "So you're bisexual? What the heck is this? You kept telling me there would never be a threesome because you wouldn't be with another woman." She blushed, turned around, and hurried away, struggling in her 10-inch heels. Another woman chose several photos from the pile and began calling out names as she headed toward the center of the ballroom. The puzzled woman stopped her, picked up a photo, stared at it, and turned to her husband with a furious expression. He started to back away and she quickly moved toward him, waving the photograph. This situation repeated 5 more times, with each victim's friends also being hit in their ears and eyes. Note: the original text included asterisks here, which I replaced with explanatory text. Joe was already awake, observing the chaos around her with dazed eyes. A man in an elegant tuxedo knelt beside her and inquired, "Are you okay?" She looked at him with curiosity and nodded. He asked, "Who are you? Can I help you?" She responded solemnly, "I'm Josephine Lord, but I don't believe anyone can assist me at this point." "Are you Josephine Reynolds Lord?" he asked in disbelief. She nodded and inquired, "Yes, I am. And who are you?" The man handed her the stack of papers he was carrying, took a photo of her with his phone, and loudly declared, "I am the bailiff. You've been served." Josephine Reynolds Lord. These documents, along with the accompanying photos and videos, substantiate the cheating claimed in Michael Morris Lord's divorce petition. He turned toward the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't had a chance to review the photos, you can simply request a copy of the divorce papers, which are public records accessible online. They list the names of all the individuals Joe W.B. has engaged in sexual activity with over the past year, along with when and where. For a small fee, I can provide a link to Joe QB's website, which comprehensively details her actions since January 1st of the previous year. If you wish to examine this information to determine whether your spouse has been involved in intimate relationships with SHB and SUMS or more, you can contact me via Cheating Spouse Pycomb. For an additional fee, I'll provide a link to her site. I can supply digital copies of the participants' actions. This evidence will prove invaluable in court. I anticipate your response. He bowed deeply and walked away, leaving behind a trail of tears, fear, and panic. He might face consequences for this act in the future, but he was compensated handsomely for it. Plus, being in New York and having his office in New Jersey, where his influential family held sway, offered him a sense of security. Jo still had the divorce papers in her lap, resting in her friend's arms, her mouth open in confusion. She glanced at the faces around her, seeing a mix of hatred, pity, anger, and unease. The usual mixture of admiration, desire, and jealousy that she had experienced throughout her privileged life was conspicuously absent. The full weight of her loss and shame hit her, and she held on to Deirdre tightly, burying her face in her friend's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. George Taylor instructed his subordinates to gather the incriminating pictures and destroy them. Looking directly at Helen, he commanded, "I want a reprimand letter from Mike Lord on my desk by Monday, with the termination papers underneath." Helen responded with a neutral expression. "I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, but Mr. Lord resigned this afternoon. He provided 2 weeks' notice, utilized the vacation time you approved last week, packed up all his belongings and left the building." Mr. Taylor's response was firm. "I won't accept his resignation. I'll fire him after giving him a reprimand. He won't find work in this industry again." "However," Helen continued, "I apologize again, Mr. Taylor, but he spoke to the chairman of the board before leaving. Your father accepted his resignation. Mr. Lord has already secured another position with a firm he previously consulted for. With your written approval, sir." Taylor's face was so red that people around were worried he might have a stroke. He was angrily swearing at his father and Mike Lord. Helen and her husband found this situation amusing, holding hands and enjoying the embarrassment. They didn't show their amusement on their faces, though. Mike Lord drove from New York in a new 4-wheel drive Chevy High Country Suburban with a big turbo diesel engine. He had ordered this special engine in addition to the regular features. He ordered the SUV in the fall as soon as the new models were available and received it yesterday. According to the GPS, it would take around 24 hours and 32 minutes to reach his new home in Austin, Texas, using the route he chose. However, he knew it would likely take him almost a week, because he planned to experience and learn about the culture of the rural states he would be passing through. When he reached Virginia, he planned to avoid the main highways and take the scenic country roads mentioned in John Denver's songs. He also wanted to explore the small towns in the Carolinas that Mary Chapin Carpenter sang about. He was excited to try the local homemade jellies and jams sold at small stores along the roadside. He intended to eat where the locals did, away from the busy highways and the lifestyle he had grown tired of. Mike and his wife had separate checking and savings accounts, but this changed after he bought his SUV. Because she had earned 10 times more money than him during their marriage, buying an $88,000 car wouldn't really balance things out. Still, he was fine using some of her money to purchase it. As per his proposal, he would keep his investments and retirement funds, and she would hold on to hers. If she agreed to his generous terms and signed the divorce papers within 10 days, he wouldn't make any claims on her penthouse or trust fund. The car's radio was set to play the best classic country music on Sirius XM station called The Roadhouse. Joe disliked country music almost as much as he disliked retro music, so he'd switched to the classic vinyl station next. He was his own person now, no longer the uninformed husband she had portrayed him as for the last couple of years. When the New Year's ball dropped the previous year, he had taken control of his life and spent the entire year organizing his thoughts. Perhaps Taylor & Son, the company he used to be part of, would survive after he left, but he didn't believe it would do well. Operating under George's poor leadership and lacking the design improvements and patents he had contributed over the last 5 years, he anticipated it would collapse within a year or two. He found satisfaction in this idea, knowing that his efforts had driven more than half of the new sales and profits in the previous year. He also had top-notch designs and improvements ready to implement as soon as his new company became operational. Oh, his former boss, who is now the head of the board, and George's father, Randolph Taylor, would likely sell the company before it failed. However, George would be revealed as the incapable fraud he truly was before that point. The idea of that made him happy. Tonight, he had successfully portrayed George and his own unfaithful wife as immoral members of society with no principles. In the next year, when his new company outperformed his old one, he would expose George's lack of business skills, just like squashing a bug on a windshield. Thinking about this brought a smile to his face. He didn't mind being a fly on the wall, observing when Josephine's parents learned about his actions at the ball. Helen had already called him to share the positive outcome. The fact that she had spread the photos all over the ballroom was even better than he had hoped, although he had intentionally designed the box to fall apart when the film was cut on 3 sides. Her parents had always looked down on him, and they were disappointed when their precious daughter decided to marry him. They thought he wasn't good enough, especially because he didn't have an Ivy League education. The reality that his engineering degree from the Colorado School of Mines and master's degree from the University of Michigan made him highly sought after in his field mattered more than an arts degree from Brown University. With a smile, he thought about the chaos he had caused and the achievements he would create in the future. Deirdre and her husband Albert drove Josephine back home right after they entered the house, and she took a look around. Joe began crying again. During the ride home, she practiced what she would say to Mike. She needed to clarify that her affairs didn't mean much to her and weren't damaging their marriage. She wanted to explain that these were like a break or an effort to influence decisions that affected both her and Mike, aiming to improve their lives. She tried to justify that casual sexual encounters actually helped them. They helped her manage her strong sexual desire and also taught her things. She used to please her husband to add variety to their intimate life. It sounded ridiculous, even to herself, and she was fully aware that Mike wouldn't believe it. The truth was he was very committed to their marriage vows. Even discussing the idea of swapping partners or engaging in role play with others angered him. So why did she think he would accept the excuses she was planning to give? Deep down, she understood that her marriage was falling apart. However, when she entered their apartment and saw that all of his belongings were gone, she realized she had fallen into a pit she had created herself. She collapsed to the floor, crying and feeling bitter, blaming her own arrogance. She couldn't easily explain her actions because she never thought she would get caught. And if by some chance she did, she believed she could convince her kind, innocent husband to forgive her. For 3 years, she had been successful in hiding her actions. But tonight, he destroyed both their marriage and her reputation completely. The week went by swiftly for Mike. He copied his SIM card before throwing away the old one in the slushy city snow. This way he could reach out without any interruptions while traveling through the Old South on his way to his new home in Texas. He sent his custom emails throughout the week. Each spouse received a personalized email with an attachment, causing marriage after marriage to fall apart. The thought of this outcome brought a grin to Mike's face. He had mailed the letter to Deirdre's husband just yesterday. Mike felt a sense of satisfaction thinking about how Al might react. Although Joe was accountable for her actions, it was Deirdre's account of the pleasure she found in her affairs, along with her friend's encouragement to share the enjoyment by being promiscuous, that truly influenced Joe's decision. On the 4th day, back in New York, Deirdre and Joe sat on the couch in their apartment. Now it was just their apartment, as Al had kicked Deirdre out after receiving an email containing a video. The video included snippets of sexual activities and a revealing conversation between Joe and Deirdre, where they described their conquests and pleasures and listed the names of their lovers. They even laughed about their unsuspecting husbands. Albert forwarded this conversation to the wives of the women mentioned, especially if he knew them, which was often the case. The turmoil was spreading and Albert found satisfaction as he watched it unfold. Things weren't any better for George either. His father had fired him and cut him off from his inheritance. In fact, his father had also fired all the top executives who were responsible for the company's negative reputation due to their actions. His father was now acting as the CEO, while his new vice president of talent development and attraction, Helen, was recruiting skilled executives from around the world. As he drove past, Mike skipped the Martin Luther King Boulevard exit and got ready to make a turn onto Cesar Chavez Street. He drove by the Austin Convention Center and noticed Lady Bird Lake on his left. He crossed Congress Avenue and parked at the exclusive high-rise apartment that his new company had arranged for him. He had paid 6 months' rent in advance for the apartment, which was on the 70th floor, and offered a view of the rainy city. This gave him time to search for the kind of house he had always wanted, complete with trees and a lawn. Once he was settled, he planned to get a dog and start looking for a reliable partner who would enjoy building a life with him and their children. His new business partners had already organized a barbecue event where they would introduce him as recently divorced, ensuring there would be plenty of eligible women there. Meanwhile, in New York City, the ongoing drama continued as exposed spouses implicated others and abusive partners shared information about other abusive partners. Helen kept Mike updated about the situation. He thought about the spreading chaos caused by the fire he had ignited in New York and couldn't help but smile. The more he learned, the more excited he became about his decision to move to Texas. He thought about it with a sense of finality, repeating, "Gone to Texas." My wife is a strong supporter of feminism and places great importance on her independence. This has influenced our married life, making it more like two independent individuals living together rather than a traditional married couple. She devotes a significant amount of her time to her work and personal projects, both at her job and in our home, which creates a dynamic environment. As a result, my role often feels more like that of a roommate rather than a typical spouse. I'm a 35-year-old guy who got married to a software developer 2 years ago. I have a career in accounting, which doesn't demand as much of my time and effort as my wife's job does. She has a strong desire to prove herself and out-earn me, which leads her to continuously take on various projects. After we got married, she began to view household tasks as a test of her pride and started expecting me to handle most of the domestic responsibilities. Due to her work commitments, my wife is often away from home during dinner hours. She prefers either eating at her workplace or getting food delivered online. As a result, we mainly spend time together on weekends. She intentionally keeps her distance from her married cousins and friends who have embraced the roles of homemakers and mothers. She prioritizes her independent lifestyle over that. I've noticed that at social gatherings, she tends to make negative comments about housewives, referring to them as servants in private conversations. I consistently tried to have open conversations with her, encouraging her to avoid making fun of women who chose different paths in life. However, she remained firm in her stance, stating that she couldn't picture herself living without a career, seeing it as a sign of failure. She took a lot of pride in her job and career, and sometimes it came off as arrogance, which often frustrated me. Despite that, I have to admit she treated me well and showed kindness to me almost every day. She'd express her love with gifts and affectionate texts throughout the day, filled with "I love you" and "I'd miss you." Her caring and consideration towards me were impressive, and I was content with our romantic life. In the bedroom, she took the lead to make sure I was happy. Recently, one of her cousins visited our town, and it was the first time they had seen each other since childhood. So we hosted a dinner to create a warm family gathering. My wife had certain expectations about her cousin, assuming she'd be a stay-at-home mom or someone facing career challenges. But to her surprise, her cousin had become a successful dentist with a stable income. This unexpected news bruised my wife's pride, as she was used to bragging about her own achievements. She couldn't help but feel jealous of anyone who had achieved more success. To try and compete with her accomplished cousin, my wife took on an extra job during the weekends, aiming to achieve greater success and wealth within our family. As a result, we didn't have much time together. One of her colleagues, Rob, from her new job, would frequently come over to our place to work together on coding and programming tasks. They were actively involved in working on important personal projects and planned to launch them soon. Since there was a significant age gap between Rob, my wife, and me, I never felt threatened by his presence at our home. Actually, Rob and I would sometimes play some games together during their breaks, and he would even cook delicious meals for us, being in his 20s. Unlike me, Rob wasn't burdened with marriage or a lot of responsibilities. He was fully focused on their project and work. It was clear that he was actively dating, frequently changing girlfriends and exploring various relationships. Because of our experience in relationships, my wife and I often found ourselves giving Rob advice in that area. On nights when they had to work late, Rob would stay over in our guest room. My wife made the choice to leave her full-time job to fully commit herself to the significant project she was collaborating on with Rob. They both put their hearts into their work, working extremely hard to make their ambitious project a reality. Being someone who values hard work, I fully supported my wife and Rob in their efforts. My wife had a strict attitude when it came to their work. If Rob ever seemed lazy, she would show her displeasure and make a big deal out of it. She emphasized that this project was her most important accomplishment, and she wouldn't tolerate any mistakes or shortcuts in how it was done. To keep things peaceful and prevent Rob from getting scared or leaving, I often found myself trying to mediate between my wife and him during their arguments. Knowing that my wife had a tendency to get angry, I made an effort to take Rob's side in order to calm her down. I needed to make sure their collaboration continued smoothly, especially when we were with our friends and family. My wife took a lot of pride in her new projects and loved to show off about them, proudly talking about her achievements to others. But, because of her excessive pride and arrogance, our old friends and family slowly stopped inviting us to events and get-togethers in response to this behavior. Rob stepped up and organized small picnics and even treated us to concert tickets, giving us chances to relax and take a break from our demanding work schedules. Our social circle got smaller, including just me, my wife, Rob, and whichever woman Rob was dating at the time. Despite having fewer people around, we found happiness in each other's company. My wife always had this ongoing need to compete with Rob's girlfriends. She was convinced that her unique blend of beauty and intelligence made her better than them. She always took every chance to show off her qualities. Sometimes, I would get really frustrated with my wife's self-centered behavior. During a big argument between us, Rob was the one who stepped in to calm things down and mend our relationship. He played a role in trying to make peace between us and bring back harmony. Over time, Rob had become like a younger brother to me, and I had complete trust in him. I even offered him the option to move in with us, but he declined politely, understanding that we needed some space. He was already spending most days and nights at our place. My wife and Rob were working hard on a project that was almost done, and their efforts were starting to pay off. They worked tirelessly on their laptops, coding and programming day and night, taking on more work as the pressure increased. My wife's irritability grew worse. She often directed her frustration at Rob, yelling and letting out her anger on him. Surprisingly, she never once complained to me about her workload. On the other hand, Rob had to deal with her bad moods and manage his own substantial workload at the same time. Seeing this, I couldn't help but feel sorry for him as he navigated through the challenges of the project while dealing with my wife's unpredictable temper. One evening, I ended up going to my company's annual dinner by myself since my wife was busy with work while I was getting ready for the event. Rob, who was also busy with their project, kept making comments about my tie choices. After a while, I settled on a red tie and said my goodbyes. When I got to the dinner venue before our boss, I couldn't help but see that everyone else was wearing blue or gray ties. It was quite different from my red one. To my surprise, they told me that the tie color was actually part of a planned theme, and they had talked about it in a WhatsApp group that I didn't catch. As I looked at my red tie, wondering if I should change it, I started to feel bored. The event hadn't started yet, and there was still some time before dinner, so I spontaneously decided to go back home and switch my tie. I was curious about Rob's reaction and wanted to playfully interact with him. I thought it would be fun to surprise him with a different tie when I got back. As I unlocked the door and walked into the house, I was surprised to find that the room where Rob and my wife had been working was empty. They were nowhere in sight. I suspected that Rob and my wife might have argued, leading him to leave and her going to our bedroom. With this thought, I went into our bedroom to change my tie. But what I walked in on completely shocked me. I was utterly dismayed to find Rob and my wife in a highly intimate situation on our own bed, without any clothes on. What I saw was way beyond anything I could have imagined, and it was deeply disturbing and disgusting to witness. Both Rob and my wife were taken by surprise and filled with horror when they saw me unexpectedly entering the house. They had wrongly assumed that I would be gone for several more hours and took advantage of that. A mix of anger and despair surged through me, making my temples throb with the rush of blood. I ignored them and quickly headed toward the room where they used to work together. My intentions were hidden in a cloud of intense emotions. Fueled by anger, I swiftly found their laptops before they could react and forcefully threw them against the wall. The laptops, which held years of their hard work, broke into pieces on impact. Then, I deliberately chose to take the broken laptops outside, making sure they couldn't be salvaged or fixed. Thankfully, their USB drives were connected to the laptops at the time, so they had no way to recover or store their important data in their state of desperation. They begged me to stop, their uncontrollable sobs showing how devastated they were by their lost efforts. My wife tried to explain that their actions were a result of exhaustion and stress from work. However, instead of calming my anger, it actually made it worse. I was overwhelmed by shock and the feeling of being betrayed, so I had to make the difficult decision to forcefully kick both my wife and Rob out of our home. Discovering their intimate connection, despite my wife treating Rob like a little brother, and the lack of any previous signs, deepened my feelings of pain and betrayal. I never thought something like this could happen to me. I let everyone know about my wife's actions, which greatly distressed her. She's always cared about her image among her peers, and because of this, she fell into a state of depression. The project she had dedicated years to was ruined, and her professional partnership with Rob came to an end. She's now relying on medication to manage her state of mind and finding it hard to complete her work due to her unstable mental condition. Her workload has significantly decreased, and she can't maintain a full-time job. In an email, she expressed her apologies. She feels an immense sense of guilt for the failure of her dream project, and believes she's solely responsible for her shortcomings, which has some truth to it. However, when I served her with divorce papers, she didn't react well. Struggling to come to terms with the situation, she finds it very tough to handle failure in her career, marriage, and other parts of her life. This makes it difficult for her to keep going. The setbacks she's faced have taken away her pride. Some might argue that the danger of pride is its potential to lead to one's downfall if arrogance persists. It can make it hard to connect with a higher power or grasp the essence of spirituality. When someone is consumed by pride, they tend to adopt a condescending attitude toward others, which hinders their ability to see beyond their own point of view. As for my decision to divorce and move forward, I found comfort in that choice. Both my ex-spouse and my old friends are now reaching out and offering their support. They've come to realize the hurtful behavior my wife displayed toward them, which had led them to exclude us from their gatherings before. Since parting ways with my wife, I've regained the backing of my friends. Engaging in activities like camping and hunting has revitalized my spirit and lifted the depression I used to feel. My wife used to foster competition between me and my friends, but now I'm free from that mindset. I no longer feel the need to pursue wealth just to outshine or dominate my companions.